Won't let me go home. Okay. Can't make me work. By user King Neptune. This story isn't mine, but a coworker on my ship. The shipping company I used to work for would do crew changes in the US. The ships were on liner route and would eventually make it back to the US, where crew members would swap out. However, I then got a new job where the ships weren't on liner service, so usually your relief would be flown out to whatever country you were in. It usually ended up being a nightmare with schedule changes, missed up flights, etc. One colleague was severely overdue. The company sent a relief out to take alarm to make sure I'm actually awake for work. One colleague was severely overdue. The company sent a relief out to take his place so he could get sent home. The company also has a policy about vacancies need to be filled before overdue reliefs. However, we were waiving this for the engineer in question and sending him a relief first, then filling the vacancy later. The relief gets there and the guy does turnover, teaches him all the specifics, etc. The outgoing engineer asks, okay, when is my flight? The chief engineer tells him, oh, sorry, actually, we are not letting you go. We need to wait for the company to send a second relief because I used that guy to fill your vacancy. You need to stay here. Needless to say, the third engineer was pissed. I think he had already scheduled vacation with his family, like Disneyland or something. Anyway, the ship got underway to sea and he was still there. Around 10 a.m. one day, I went to the officers' lounge to get a cup of coffee and chill for a few minutes. I saw that guy sitting in the lounge in his pajamas watching the news, lol. And the next day, instead of working, he decided to just watch TV and nap all day. He said, yeah, my relief is here. As far as I'm concerned, my job is complete. They cannot get me to a flight, but they can't make me work. After a few days of this, the chief engineer actually tried to give the third engineer a disciplinary. He called him into his office and berated him. The next day, the company called the chief engineer in the middle of the night, daytime in America, and basically said, what the fuck are you doing? Let him go now. The disciplinary didn't go through. He got flown off in the next port, and he continued to draw overdue relief pay and salary those days he was not working. TLDR. Supervisor makes crew member stay on past his relief date. Crew member says, but that stays, but just doesn't work. Crew member eventually gets home instead. Edit. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention that third assessment engineer was already overdue for relief. I think he was already 2 months over when this occurred, and this was the pre-COVID before the pandemic began. So he was already supposed to be home. Then he got a name, and he was told, when your relief shows up, you're being flown back to your home of record. He told his wife and family that he was coming home, but then the chief engineer pulled the rug out from under him at the last minute. Edit 2, side story. On the same ship, some other crazy shit happened after pandemic. The SU on my ship, Stewart's utility man, was overdue. His relief showed up to the ship. The relief could barely walk. He needed a hip replacement, I guess, but decided to come out anyway. At the time, you couldn't get a flight out from Singapore, so the outgoing SU just stayed on and decided to keep working. 3 days went by, and then 2 weeks after that, he stopped getting a paycheck. The outgoing SU checked why he wasn't getting a paycheck, and get this, he had exhausted his leave. He called the company and they told him, you're at home. You went home over 6 weeks ago. They had marked him as on vacation from his original relief date, despite the fact that he was there and working overtime the whole time. The company was charging him vacation days, and then those were all spent, stopped paying him, and told him he was AOL. Anyway, the reason why I brought up the guy before who was on crutches basically and had a hip problems, within 2 weeks that guy basically could no longer walk. We had to abandon ship/lifeboat drill, and the guy was blocking the whole crew from going up the ladder, stairs, to the lifeboat. He was expected to be able to don a firefighting ensemble anyways, so he had to be medically repatriated to the U.S. company sees anyone in that sort of condition requires a medical escort to help them get home. Guess who got to be the escort? The guy who relieved. Off going SU. Edit 3. Oh yeah, another thing that's funny is that the lounge is right down the passageway, the hallway from the chief engineer's office. So he was sitting back, feet kicked up, only feet away from where the chief was working. If the chief, captain, or anyone else went to get a coffee from the lounge, they had to see him sitting there. So it was very much an in-your-face or power move on the third's part, and it was quite the object of gossip and jokes around the ship. I used to also grab ice from there before going to the gym, and I would get a chuckle every time if he was there for those days. I think that's an amazing thing to do. It's just like, well, I've got nothing better to do. And this was Malicious Compliance. And we actually have more. We have 2 more stories from King Neptune for Malicious Compliance. Sorry, boss, I'm not qualified. Once again by user King Neptune 07. This is another Merchant Marine Malicious Compliance story. My last one was about a guy who refused to work until he was sent home to go on his pre-planned trip to Disney World. In the Merchant Marine, there are licensing and credential requirements to determine what capacity you can work at. It boils down to the more time and experience you have, the higher you can sell. Sometimes you also have to take a test to upgrade your license or rating. At my current company, they have promotion boards once per year. Everyone has a permanent rating that determines the minimum they can sell as. But if you have the license, you can sometimes get temp promoted to a higher job with a higher salary until you either leave that ship or the person you were temp working for returns. On my ship, several years ago, there was a third assistant engineer. This guy was working as a third, but already had his second assistant license. When he arrived, he had just completed the test to upgrade to first assistant engineer, but was waiting on his new license to come. In the engine department, the highest is chief engineer, the first assistant, second, and so on. The engineer had put in his promotion package to advance to second assistant engineer permanently, but he failed to be promoted. Specifically, the company told him that he was not qualified for the promotion to second engineer. This meant he couldn't be permanently promoted to second, but he could go get temp jobs. Several months after he got on board, the chief engineer wanted to give the second leave for a month or 2, so the second would leave for 30 or 60 days, then come back to do his job. He wanted the third to fill in the meantime. The third said, "Nope, sorry, no can do. You see, I'm not qualified according to our employer." What the chief engineer didn't know was that the first engineer had to leave for some reason 30 days after the second was due to leave. The second did not hold a first engineer license, but the third did. The first engineer left, and there was no one on land to replace him, so the third engineer, whose license had come in since then, skipped right over 2 levels and became the new first. He said, "You people said I'm not qualified for second. You didn't say anything about first." And I love that, like, totally malicious, but also, like, fucking petty. You're gonna tell me, "Oh, you're not qualified to work the second, even though, like, you passed the test and you have the certificate and license for it," whatever. But you are able to do the first. Y'all didn't say shit about the first, and I've got the second's license, which means I can temporarily do the first job. And to me, that is hilarious. Thank you, King Neptune. And we are back to Malicious Compliance. And this title, no, I have not read this yet, but this title already has me in stitches. "Punish Me Harder, Daddy," by user King Neptune 07. Yeah, we have all 3 of these just right next to each other, because I felt like they needed to all be next to each other, even though they didn't. Hey y'all! This is story number 3 in my series of Merchant Marine Malicious Compliance stories. This next one is well known at my company and remembered fondly by all. There was an asshole captain. We'll call him Captain B for short. Captain B was captain of a tanker that would give jet fuel and diesel to Navy ships while at sea. We call it underway replenishment. Captain B was known to verbally berate crew and call people out by name on the PA system. Think of it like an announcement system that goes through the whole ship. And telling them, Bob fucks this up, Jack has really been slacking today and lazy, Jill majorly fucked up this other thing. The tanker B was was operating for a while out of Subic Bay, Philippines. The ship would come in and load fuel, then go out to the South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, whatever. The crew always liked going to Subic Bay because they could get delicious meals, beer, drinks, sit back on the beach, party, whatever, and all for pretty cheap with the exchange rate of the Philippine peso. One day, Captain B got an idea. He would punish the crew for not allowing them to go ashore in port, presumably by their poor performance. Not all employees at this company are governed by a union, and we have a contract. Within the contract, it clearly states that if the crew are not allowed to go ashore, they will receive penalty pay for each hour they are restricted to the vessel during their non-working time. There are certain exceptions, like if the country is way too dangerous with terrorist attacks, liberty can be restricted, but for the most part, the crew must be granted liberty while in the port. There is no way the Captain B didn't know of this rule because there is all kinds of verbiage that says how to post a sailing board when people must be back, etc., etc. Captain B announced that there would be no liberty as punishment to the crew. He was even smart enough to put it in writing. Ooh, that's gonna come back and bite Captain B. I can see it now. Instead of becoming upset, the whole crew got a smirk on their face and money in their eyes. The mood at dinner was spectacular. Everyone was pre-counting their money and trying to decide what to do with it. Should I pay off the rest of my car payment, blow it at the strip club, take a side trip to some other city? So the punishment lasted one night. The next day, the ship had loaded with fuel and pulled out. Captain B even tried to deny everyone's penalty pay. The very next day, U.S. time, when the office was back open, Captain B got a panic call from his superior. What the fuck are you doing? Let the crew go immediately. Do you have any idea how much budget you just wasted? The thing is, for most of the crew, their penalty rate is the same as their overtime rate. So instead of knocking off at 5 p.m. and going into town, the crew still stopped working at 5 and just went back to the room or the gym or whatever. Then they got paid from 5 p.m. to midnight, 7 hours, and then from midnight to 8 a.m. the next day. That's 15 hours of overtime for the entire crew. Some guys who stand to watch were on a different schedule and even got more money than that because their shift ended at noon, 4 p.m. or whatever. In fact, people that normally would have worked overtime in the evenings didn't because they were getting paid anyway. So why work? A week later, the ship pulled back into the Philippines and everyone went out on the town, threw a huge party, and did toast in the captain's honor. He essentially gave everyone drinking and partying money while trying to punish them. Captain B even stood by the gangway and glared at people leaving the next in port, and one guy said, "Hey, Cap, can you punish me again, please? Thank you so much." Captain B wasn't even held responsible for any of his actions that day, and didn't get into any trouble whatsoever. Besides getting berated verbally by the class manager, he ended up fucking himself a few years later, though, when one of his many sexual harassment complaints came back to bite him. He was fired with cause for sexually harassing a younger female. Well, damn. I was hoping he would get in some trouble other than, like, the nasty phone call. Damn.